James Smith, and welcome to the GovX Show, the podcast that interviews senior government officials from here in the UK and around the world as we count down to the largest public sector transformation conference in the country. GovX Digital in November brings together over 130 public sector executives with a 50-50 split from the UK and overseas. And on the GovX Show, we get to know them a bit better as they join us to discuss their career, their current focus and future plans, as well as what chasing government excellence means to them personally. Today, I was fortunate to catch up with Lynda Rawsthorne, Director of Prison Infrastructure at the Ministry of Justice. Lynda is currently overseeing new approaches to the design and manufacture of prisons in the UK, responsible for new build prisons, including the new Category C prison at Wellingborough. This is a huge undertaking, and the innovative approaches to project management of Lynda's team marry very nicely with the current emphasis in government to accelerate delivery and achieve greater impact from government spending.
Welcome to the GovX podcast. Really pleased to have you join us and to spend a bit of time with us today.
Thanks, James. Great to be here.
Now, I'd like to sort of start off sort of getting to know our speakers a bit better by asking them sort of what they've been reading that they would recommend. And in that way, I hope to build up a sort of a long list of good reads for the summer. So what's been something that you've enjoyed reading, whatever context?
So since I started at Ministry of Justice a couple of years ago, people have been recommending Geoffrey Archer's Prison Diaries. And they're a few years old now, but it's been one of those things I've not got round to. So since we've been in lockdown, I have worked my way through his Prison Diaries. And I think what's been different for me is really seeing it from that perspective, because my role is about building prisons, and it's too easy to get just into the project and what you're building rather than understanding what it's like to live in the different prisons. And he wrote 3 from a Category B, a Category C and a Category D open. So I'm not sure that everyone would want to read them, but for me, they've been a really interesting thing to read.
That sounds fascinating. And what sort of, I suppose, insight did it give you that you're going to hold on to?
I think about the things to be aware of and how quickly situations can change within a prison. And he was fortunate that he had people who were supportive of him, but he also had people who were particularly looking out to pick a fight, and just how quickly that can happen and how aware he was of different opportunities, and also the pecking order in a prison. And a lot of that relates to the jobs that you get and the kind of freedom that you have from those roles. So everybody's looking, for example, to work in the medical centre because you get a bit more freedom to walk around. And with some roles, you can actually stay over there. So it was just a different insight.
Fascinating. Now that was an unexpected choice, but a good one. I like that. So I'll certainly bank that one. So, I mean, it'd be great if you could just share with us what your motivation was to get into the public sector in the first place. It's always very interesting to sort of get a sense of the journey that someone's taken into government. So what was your journey?
So I was at university at Reading doing land management, and our head lecturer there said, if you want the best training to become a chartered surveyor, go into the public sector. Don't stay, but go into the public sector and get the training. So I went into the valuation office, which is part of HMRC, at 21. And I chartered at 23. I had brilliant training, and it would have been the time I would have thought about leaving, but I married someone in the military, and so I have moved 15 times, and I've had 7-year career break, all sorts of part-time working. And in the time before you could work effectively at home, the valuation office had about 250 offices, so every time we moved, they just let me move. And so it was a real opportunity to carry on a career in an environment where most people just couldn't. So I stayed, but I also found that I did such interesting jobs, because I think I would have been tempted to stay in roles that I enjoyed, but I had to give them up and move. And so I ended up, for example, at one point I was head of customer services, which felt like a very different job. And on my first day, I was reminded that as part of that, I was custodian of the Welsh language, and what was I going to do about it? So it was like, oh. So I found myself in situations I wouldn't have expected to be in, as a result of the diversity of the public sector roles and the fact that I had to keep moving every couple of years.
I hope the Welsh language was safe in your hands.
I didn't learn a lot of it, but I made sure it was more about making sure that everything was translated as it needed to be and that everyone had the same opportunities. And funnily enough, my daughter went to Cardiff University for her degree, so it was just interesting when all the paperwork came through all in Welsh. It was a reminder of how it is.
And it's interesting that you said that at university you were advised to go in and learn your skills in the public sector, but not to stay. Why do you think that caveat was added, and what's your perspective on that now?
So at that time, what they said is if you want to get high up in the public sector, you should start in the private sector and then move across at a higher level. Whereas if you're in the public sector, you might get stuck at those lower levels because they value in the public sector that commercial experience from the private sector. I think there is still a bit of that, because it's really interesting. At the senior civil service level, nearly all jobs, and the guidance is they should be trawled for everybody, not just internally. So I think people come with different perspectives. And there is something to be said that coming from the private sector, you have more commercial experience. On the other hand, I think we've got a lot better in the public sector now with Crown commercial frameworks, the commercial function. At having better expertise. So I think the world has changed, and I've seen both sides, but also seen people come in and out and find that option. But I think once you've been in, just the opportunity to make a difference is so much bigger, I think, in the public sector.
Yeah. So, I mean, bringing it forward to 2020, obviously it's been an interesting year for all of us, as we were just sort of talking about before we sort of press record on the podcast. But how has it challenged you and your team in particular? What's your experience been so far?
I think there's been various aspects. Firstly, we suddenly all started working from home instantaneously. We were lucky because a lot of us worked now and again from home, so it wasn't completely a surprise, but doing that differently. And I think the big surprise for 2020 is supporting people's needs. So of course people had children at home, people were being interrupted, people had to do homeschooling, which in a traditional working environment just wouldn't have been acceptable, and then just became the norm. So it was really about treating people differently, and we really got to know each other a lot better and understand the needs that people had. And related to that, the people who didn't travel into London so much, we recognised that they'd probably been missed out a bit more than the others, and we've stopped that now, and they're more involved in the conversations, and that's something we don't want to lose. And then on the other hand, we've also had to keep our projects going, and that was absolutely exhausting, trying to keep construction projects going that were safe to do so, and being sure that they were safe to do so was a real challenge, particularly at the start.
So I mean, obviously one of the things you'll be talking about at the conference in November is the whole sort of push to accelerate delivery, which is obviously very much on the government's agenda right now. What's your experience been of being able to sort of move forwards, but not just move forwards, but move forwards at pace? And sort of what are the lessons you think you can take from that moving forwards?
So one of the things that has really come out of this is government pulling together. So immediately there were cross-governmental department daily updates, working with the construction industry, working with one another to try and free up materials, and also give safety and decide which were the critical government projects so that we can prioritise them. So I've made a lot of contacts, which I don't think I'll ever lose. And that helped me. For example, I got some of my materials stuck in the Republic of Ireland. So to be able to go to Bays to get to the right person to then help us unlock that is something that I wouldn't have been able to do before. And also there was an announcement at the weekend about the changes in planning law. So we've been working with Ministry of Communities, Housing and Local Government, Number 10, looking at what changes could happen. I think the challenge is so much activity in projects is concurrent, and it sometimes seems really simple to just stop something and you think you gain all that time, but it's not that simple. So we really want to be sure that the things we change really make a difference and don't just cause bad feelings, for example, because, you know, when you ask for planning for a prison, it can be pretty emotive. So we don't want to do the wrong thing. On the other hand, there's the project speed and the requirement to build, which I think we all feel a real responsibility for, to support the infrastructure and support the communities.
It's really interesting that you talk about the impetus to collaborate across sort of departments and in some cases across jurisdictions. What was so hard before that has been sort of undermined in the current crisis, and what do you think are the prospects of holding on to that greater way of collaborating as we move forwards?
I think people were just caught in their own silos. So we've done quite well in that you collaborate with a small group of people, but I don't think that we had reached out across government and looked at everybody who does the same thing. And there is a bit around the fact that you have a bit more time with you not commuting. There's a bit more time in the day. I think the risk with that, talking to a lot of colleagues, is you genuinely now can log on at 8 in the morning till 8 at night and be in Zoom calls hour after hour. So you do have to have a bit of balance in it. But certainly the other real advantage is the faces to names. So although we did do a bit of Skype calls, it was still a lot of telecalls. And now you're seeing all the faces with the names that you'd vaguely heard of. And I think it builds those relationships. So I'm sure that we won't let that go. I think our real challenge going forward, we've talked a lot about, will we ever go back into the office? And I'm really hopeful that we can have a better work-life balance. So perhaps a couple of days in the office, a day out on site, a couple of days at home. I think the challenge will be whether our ministers are content with that, and also everybody else's behaviour, because if you're being held to account and everybody else is going to be in the room, you really feel you need to be there.
Interesting. But I do get this sense that this is likely to be a permanent culture change moving forwards. The greater willingness to have meetings remotely. I think that many people will find that their return to an office is staggered. I think that certainly in the private sector, the assumption that there is such a thing as an office to go back to is going to be certainly redefined and sort of perhaps fundamentally challenged. So I think that that's the sort of the context in which the public sector is going to be operating and increasingly sort of benchmarking against. So I do think that this seems to be sort of a permanent shift. What's your sense of that?
I hope so. And we were already working across government to try and move more work out of London. And also we were certainly didn't have a desk each. You know, there was sort of 70% shared and so on and so forth, which of course isn't great in the COVID environment where you don't want to be sharing desks particularly. So yeah, I really hope so. There's definitely an intention at the moment. I just think it's going to be helped by the fact that when we can go back in, which we can now, our building can only take about a tenth of what it could take before. So it actually means that even if we do want to go back in, it will be staggered, as you said. So I think that will do it. And the other thing is quite a lot of my colleagues are genuinely looking at moving house, moving further from London on the grounds that they'll only be in 1 or 2 days a week. And so they can have a better quality of life. So that will absolutely drive a change because they won't be able to get in all the time.
I mean, our office here at GovX Digital was in WeWork, and you know, it's a fantastic facility. It's not without its challenges at the moment, but there's about 5,000 people in that building, and that's, you know, fine when you've got people sort of crammed into lifts in the morning, but you know, there's no way you can get 5,000 people into the building, and certainly even a fraction of that getting up into work between the sort of 8 o'clock to 9:30 window. I think that's something which has gone forever. So there's certainly sort of huge changes to how people sort of organise themselves in an office environment, I think, moving forwards. But so let's talk about moving forwards. Let's talk about the GovX Digital event, obviously in November, which we're really delighted that you're speaking at. What is it that you're most excited to share with the audience? Why is it that you think there's a really interesting story to tell about the acceleration of the delivery of the programmes at the Ministry of Justice?
I think it's the fact that we're doing things in a different way that we've never done before. So we have spent quite a lot of time building our modern method of construction, our digital approach, but this time we've had a really tight deadline set to us with speed, and so we've had to actually look at doing things differently. And it's about what you protect and what your priorities are as you go through. And so, for example, in the past, we've had each of the contractors have their own designers. Now we're going to bring in our own designer, only do it once, but then you've got to take that risk that people are prepared to take the design. So it's balancing the opportunities with the risks and going in with your eyes open. And I just think that the prison construction is genuinely such an emotive area, that we have to really look at it from everybody's perspective as we go forward. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you all.
And obviously, you're going to be in good company. We'll have about 130 other speakers, which we're obviously very excited to have sort of come together, because the format of the event is obviously very much based around both the presentations, but also bringing civil servants with similar areas of focus onto panels to sort of discuss those areas of focus together. So what is it that you're interested in learning from some of the other speakers, or hearing from the experience of the other people on the agenda?
Well, there's a whole variety. There's quite a lot of colleagues from digital, particularly Alexander Holt. I was really interested in, the head of emerging opportunities, because I do think digital is going to be so critical as we go forward. And linked to that, I really like the idea of having that multinational approach. So I know you've got a lot of speakers from America, but also like Italy, Estonia, those different perspectives. And I was lucky enough last year to be speaking in Turkey and Slovenia, and getting to see the people there and their different perspectives really made me think again about my project. So I think it's the variety of the speakers that you've got. And of course, you've got Lord Francis Maud coming, who over the years I've seen speak, and always is very thought-provoking. So I'm really looking forward to see what he has to say.
Well, I spoke to him last week for one of our podcast episodes, and he was certainly in very good form. He's recovering from COVID himself, actually. But
oh, really?
Yes, he had it earlier, but he's over it now. He said it wasn't pleasant, but I guess we all knew that already. But certainly, in terms of hearing him talk through not just what he achieved in government, which obviously is widely shared and understood, but also what he considers is sort of set for the UK public sector as we come out of COVID and look ahead in sort of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Certainly very interesting. So I'm sure you'll enjoy that when you get to hear it. But obviously the format of GovX Digital revolves around a lot of these panel discussions as a bit more interactive than just a series of presentations. What's your take on that? What sort of value do you think that will have for someone like yourself?
So I love a panel discussion. I suppose it links to the point I made earlier about different perspectives. I think when you're asked the questions, it's really interesting hearing what your colleagues have to say, because sometimes it's just something completely different to what you're going to say. Sometimes there's a temptation to try and jump in first so that you can say the obvious answer, but actually everyone comes at it with something a bit different. And I think
that's interesting. That is a pro tip. I mean, if you're on a big panel and you're worried that all the clever answers will be taken first, get in there first with your own. So clearly you've got experience with this. I'm very impressed with
that. Well, there's nothing worse, is there, than when you've got a great answer and then the person next to you says it. So no, absolutely. And I think the thing as well is that you make those relationships as well often with your panel, and you often stay in touch afterwards. I think the difference with yours is that there's so many speakers, because I do a lot of speaking in government environments, and there's quite a small infrastructure group of us, so we see quite a lot of each other. So this is a much more diverse group.
I'm a huge fan of that sort of asymmetrical conversation, that sort of asymmetrical approach to learning, where you bring enough interesting people together, particularly where they've got sort of common challenges and that they're primed and ready to talk about those challenges. That's where I think the magic happens, and certainly that's why we're very excited to have you join us. But before we sort of wrap up this sort of short introduction to yourself, which has been a real pleasure, I thought it'd be nice to sort of just wrap it up by sort of asking you to sort of channel your younger self and the questions that you might have had at the beginning of your career going to the public sector, and just thinking sort of what advice you would have for someone following in your footsteps as they approach a career in the UK government.
I think the advice I'd give to everybody is to make the most of every opportunity and believe in yourself. I remember the sort of saying the hardest bit of having a job is getting it. And sometimes, particularly as I talked about in my career, that I've moved around a lot, I would look at some of the jobs that were coming up that I could do, and I was just a bit taken aback about whether I'd be able to manage them. And particularly in a number of years when I worked part-time. And I think sometimes you doubt yourself, particularly when you're joining a new environment in a new role. And I've just learned that people are so supportive, and as long as you go with an open mind and you go to learn, then it makes such a difference. And what I've learned over time is that having had such a diverse group of roles, when things happen, people go, oh, you know, how are we going to deal with this? I can always say, well, let me tell you, I've seen something similar before. So I think a bit of experience and self-belief.
As a friendly observer of the public sector, because obviously I work in sort of journalism and media, but I've worked across multiple sectors in my time, but I've come back over many years. I've always come back to the public sector because it's precisely that sort of open-hearted desire to try and make a positive difference that characterises most civil servants, that is just so refreshing to work with and work alongside. So on that happy note, I'll say thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure getting a sense of who you are as a person, and certainly we're looking forward to having you up on that virtual panel. And I look forward to you sort of cutting in and answering the question first when the time comes.
Thank you very much.